Hello, everybody. Welcome to GM Joel's Chess Week Recap on ICC. Is the 2019 World Cup the best tournament ever? 4 rounds are in the books, and one American hero still remains. But let's review the third round first, where superior endgame technique made the difference in several matches. Wesley So squeezed out a tough rook ending against Vidit to take the match in 2 games. Lenier Dominguez survived 2 elimination games against Wang Hao in a match dominated by the white pieces, then finally won an extremely drawish rook ending to advance to the 4th round. Meanwhile, Ding Liren took advantage of his experience to eliminate Firouzja. The young Iranian star had been very impressive in the World Cup, but he didn't know the principles of an important theoretical endgame and lost the match for it. And this is what we've come down to in this position. On move 59, Ding takes his pawn on b6, so he's going to capture the pawn on a5, and then he will be a pawn up. But rook pawns are notoriously poor in rook and pawn endings. So even though the black king is very far away, it's not necessarily too far away. Now here, Firouzja plays rook to d3, which curiously is one of the few losing moves in the position. Even rook to f3, which looks even less logical, is a drawing move, but this one isn't. Now, how should black play this? Well, rook a3 kind of looks most normal, and really the way to play this is to put the rook behind the pawn and come charging over with the king. All right, so after rook a3, king takes a5, king f5. Okay, what can white try? Well, first of all, if white tries to cut the king, this is a well-known draw. White needs the needs the king cut off one more file. For instance, king b4, rook a1, a5, king e7, to make sure the rook doesn't hang out on the 8th rank. And then black is able to just wait, and he'll be able to chase the king in front of the pawn. But with pawns other than the rook pawn, you've got the Lucena position. But here, because they're, I often joke about the I file, but I don't know what would be one less than the A file. But there's no file to the left of the A file, so the king can't get out. So this is basically just a well-known drawn position, and Firouzja, for whatever reason, wasn't prepared to head for it. Okay, there is another variation. I tried in this case. I tried for the king cutoff, but instead of rook d6, white can try king b5. This is actually maybe the more critical variation, king e5. But the thing is, the black king gets over in time. It's very important. It doesn't get back, but it gets over, and this is good enough. So let's say white plays rook h6. Now, if given a little time, I think if white gets the king to b6, I think that is a winning position. However, black has time to stop it. King c5. This is critical. The king gets over and blocks the white king from cutting out, and of course threatens mate in 1, which white certainly doesn't want to allow. And this makes an easy draw. So that's the most thematic variation for black. Instead, he played rook d3, king takes a5, king a5, and now actually Ding plays the wrong move. King b5 is the winning move, king e5, and king c6. This is important to kind of fence out the black king. And this is winning because rook d6 check, king c7. Black does not have a check on the second rank. If the rook was on the f file, he would. And the other fine point is that king e6, king c7, black is not able to cross over towards the pawn because of rook d6 check. That's why the rook is particularly poor on the d file. Now, after the move king a6, actually black is back in the game again. King e5, a5. But now, Firouzja plays rook d7. This is a losing move. He has another chance, the same idea as mentioned before, to bring the king over to the c file. Now, if a6, black is in time with rook d7 check, and he's able to take the rook and get the a pawn. Very important point, and because of that, as I said, black is in time to make a draw. So that was the critical idea, to slide the king over and get to the c file. After rook d7, now it becomes a very fundamental win for white, as the a pawn basically just can't be stopped. And this was the end of the game. It didn't go much longer. The a pawn coming through. So a game Firouzja could have drawn. And you know, for all you people out there that say, oh, you know, why study the end game? Maybe you guys don't get to end games in your games, but this shows how critically important it is in grandmaster chess, especially you know, in these matches, because so many games come down to these small margin end games where you need to be able to find the right ideas and moves quickly, because you're generally short of time. And if you get into tie breaks and you're playing rapid or 10-minute or 5-minute, even more critical. So you don't always have time to figure everything out. It's good to have that fundamental knowledge as a foundation. All right, so that was the decisive win for Ding, who was able to eliminate Firouzja because of that game. Now, meanwhile, Jeffrey Zhang continued his run by taking down Anish Giri in the 6th match game, when a tired Giri, who had survived the longest match of round 2, could not find a proper defense. We'll see that one next. Okay, so Giri playing white. And one of the great strengths that we've seen from Jeffrey Zhang in this event is the ability to play multiple openings. He's been very flexible, and just seems like he's given a mountain of thought to what he's going to do. Either that, or he's just making very good choices. But here he goes for a modern defense, and Giri, he gets into something that Giri has had before. Knight c6 is not that common a move, but Giri has had this position a couple of times before and played the move d5. So if Zhang was able to set this position up on his table, you know, to be able to have this prepared in advance when you're playing, I believe this would be 10-minute games at this stage, very, very helpful. So, okay, the engine says that the position is favorable for white, but really it's a position with chances for both sides. And I kind of like this move bishop g4 because there's not much to do for this bishop in this type of position. So trade it for the knight if you can. That could be a good attacking piece, and have squares for your pieces. As it turns out, the bishop is exchanged for another bishop, as I suppose he could have taken the knight, but he was waiting maybe for Giri to push h3, which of course never happened. By the way, this is all a new position, and we've had one since e takes d, way back to e takes d5. So the players are totally on their own at this point. So it turns out the bishops get exchanged. f4. Now in this position, my engines all seem to like this primitive looking move queen g5, I guess maybe with knight f5 ideas, but I think if Giri allowed rook takes c3, he would be labeled a chess tourist, as Kasparov once famously did to Mosezian. It's just not a very natural move, whether good or bad. So, but anyway, he played f4. And so Zhang speculates a bit by sacrificing the e-pawn. He could have just defended it, and if b3, he can retreat the knight simply back to b6. And that would actually be quite good for him. But, keep in mind this is a fast game, and so, you're going on feel and the knowledge that even if your opponent may have some opportunities, if they're hard to find, he's not necessarily going to find them. Okay, so he attacks this knight on c3, queen b4. And so he doesn't really have time to go in knight e6 check because the threat to the knight is very important. Rook c5. And around here, Giri's defense is very wanting. He could have played queen e3, and then he's ready to follow up with rook d3, and he sets up a very good defensive formation. And moreover, he's ready to counterattack with ideas like queen e6 or rook takes f7 if the rook moves away from f8. So he would be objectively in quite good shape if he found that. Queen d4 was really just a waste because black played a5. He's not able to trade queens. And in fact, after that, he still should play queen e3 or rook d3 or probably a few other better moves. King b2. It's not really a great move. Now black increases the pressure. Still this, the queen is not on a very good square on d3. But white could, if Giri would find the move queen h3, he'd still be okay because now he's got a very good idea to play rook takes f7 check, which could lead to perpetual, and that would be enough to equalize the game. But he played rook c1, he gets into a passive mode, and then b5, which in view of what white could do may not be the best move. The computer suggests h5 or king f8 to take away some of white's ideas. But again, white has to find the move queen h3, and if he does, he's okay. But he's got to find that move. But Giri plays f5. That looks like a tired move because he just missed the threat. The whole point of b5 was that now he's got an extra coverer of the c3 square. So if queen takes c3, knight c4 check wins the queen. That's a big one. So Giri just had to play on down material, and he really has no compensation. Zhang smartly centralizes the knight. The attack never materializes. We've got a counterattack instead. And that just basically ends things because threats here and here. So Giri just has to play down a piece. And he realizes immediately it's hopeless. He doesn't have enough pawns for it. So that enabled Jeffrey Zhang to get through to the fourth round by beating, one of the highest rated players in the world. So very good match win there. All right. Last week we looked a bit at the Chinese upstart Zhu Zhangyu, and he left the tournament in the third round after dropping a tactical duel to Grishuk that went back and forth with some mutual errors. And I'd like to take a look at that skirmish next. All right, I'm not going to focus on the opening too much. We've got so much to get to. I mean, it starts off kind of looking quiet enough, but it gets pretty crazy. Right around here. As Zhu gives up this pawn, the G pawn, and who will have the better attack? Two knights against two bishops. Well, objectively, this seems to be good for black, as white is not really able to keep this going. Knight f6. And now this is a critical move. Grishuk actually blunders. He should play queen h3, attacking the knight in f5, and this is a winning move. White has this idea of sacrificing on h7, which was actually an important possibility in the game, but here it's just much slower. And it doesn't work. Black is able to defend. But instead of queen h3 came bishop e7. And now rook takes h7 would actually be crushing. This threat of rook h1 coming, and if white gets the queen for two rooks, he's going to be winning because he's got a great queen and knight combination, which really just might mate, but he also has some pawns steamrolling through the center. If bishop d6, rook h1, we see this is a different story. Queen g2, and white runs down the bishop and has a crushing position. Instead, she played queen c6. Okay, so he's got the idea to play rook h1, but it's just too slow. Black just simply takes the knight. If rook h1, he can take that one too, and he can take another one. Black just takes too many things. So tried rook g1. I don't know if he even has a particularly large threat with that, but Grishuk just made sort of an obvious move, bishop g6. And here Zhu wins the queen, but we see a huge difference as black has this pawn on the board and the knight is gone. So this was actually not that hard for black to convert, and Grishuk does a nice job with this as he coordinates his pieces. White tries to get something with these pawns. Okay, little trick, if bishop takes e5, there's a check on h1. So that's why king g7. So he has to get out of the way. But now he just breaks down the center, and an easy finish here. Bishop takes e5. There's a bit of a nice point here that if queen takes rook, bishop f6 check, and wherever the king goes, the rook will hunt it down with a check, and then the bishop will take the queen. So he took the bishop, and black got both of these pawns in the center. Just a very smart and efficient way to play for Grishuk, as now the two rooks against the queen with the two pawns, and he'll just bludgeon him with those two rooks, and the position is quite hopeless. So a little bit of tactics, fun tactics there, and we're going to hear more from Grishuk in the fourth round. Now, round 4 started disastrously for the remaining 3 Americans. Wesley So, who had gone through the tournament pretty easily, I don't think he trailed to this point. He lost the first game to Vityugov, and when Wesley could not generate chances in the second game, Vityugov had his second straight upset after vanquishing Karyakin in round 3. So sometimes, how you get through your matches is not really a predictor of how far you're going to get. The first time you run into trouble, unfortunately, it might be the last time. So unfortunately, Wesley So exits. Meanwhile, wasn't good for the other guys either. Jeffrey Zhang lost to J.K. Duda, and Dominguez found himself on the precipice after he failed to find the right endgame defense against Grishuk. We're going to take a look at that subtle bishop endgame next. All right, we're going to pick up the action in a bishop's opposite colors endgame, 74 moves deep. And here Grishuk makes a break for it by sacrificing h6 to make connected pass pawns. And connected pass pawns are so powerful that even with bishops opposite colors, they're often enough to overcome the defense, especially when they get advanced this far. Without the black pawns, if that pawn gets to f6, it's winning, and white can force that because even if black stops it, let's say with bishop g5, white can play king g4, king h5, king g6, and push the pawn. But there are the black pawns on the board, and they make a huge difference. So bishop g5 was the move that Dominguez should have played. And after king g4, it felt to him like he'd be in Zugzwang and might have to start giving stuff away. But he could play king f8, f6. Now, normally, getting the pawns this far decides the game, but not so easily. The bishop could come around the other side. Now, it doesn't really matter what precise moves white plays here. The problem is the same. Okay, black can play h5 just to distract the king. Now, if black could just, if white could just simply take that pawn off, that would certainly help. But here, black has a nice resource, bishop e7. And, okay, if white, let's say moves the king back, I think you could push the h-pawn. I mean, white basically can't do three things that he needs to do. Say takes. He can't control the c-pawn, control the h-pawn, and save the e-pawn. If he goes to defend the e-pawn with the king, the h-pawn rolls. And if he takes the h-pawn, now comes c2 and wins the pawn. So that was the key, is that the c-pawn was terribly useful for the future. When it looks like things are over, then its advanced would make the draw. But I think Dominguez was very low on the clock at this point, and panicked a little bit with c2, f6 check, forcing the king, and takes the pawn. And the problem is that white is able to defend the pawns, and now he just has the one pawn to deal with, which means that he can put his bishop he could place his bishop much more effectively. So now it turns out to be a routine win. You see h5. So first Grishuk stops the pawn. So here's the thing. How do you stop the pawn? You have two choices, d8 or the a3, f8 diagonal. If you put the bishop on that longer diagonal, the problem is that the white king can just come around to d7. Can't keep it out. The white will, give a bishop check when necessary to cover the e8 square. And black can never attack the f pawn because e7 check makes a queen. So that's why he gets caught on the short diagonal. But once he's on the short diagonal, he's going to fall prey to Zugzwang. So kind of interestingly, Grishuk coaxes this pawn forward. Okay, so now those moves are exhausted, and he's down to bishop and king moves. And now it's Zugzwang. Okay, he could delay matters by giving up the pawn. White will just come back with the bishop, and the problem is you're going to have to allow e7, and white will make a queen. So nice, subtle ending. Just unfortunate for Dominguez there that he gave the pawn too quickly and didn't realize that it would be an asset if he hung on to it. It would be enough to draw later. So Grishuk got the jump on him there, but credit to Grishuk, to Dominguez. He created chances in the second game. One of those Gioco pianos, where the bishop comes to g5, so black got black to advance the pawns to create a double edged position. Grishuk was fine for most of the way, but got started to get low on time and went wrong, and so the match went into overtime. Now Grishuk has been death to Americans in the Catalan. He won a great game this year against Nakamura. He felt one of his best games ever. And Dominguez returned to the opening from game one, which ultimately led to a loss, and it proved to be unsuccessful again when he made a bid for freedom that failed tactically. Let's see what did in Dominguez. So as I said, it was the Catalan, and it was very similar to the first game in the opening. Queen c2, a4. I think is definitely taken over as the main move, as the queen takes c4 b5 line seems to have been shut down. So white gives up the bishops for space, and then black gives back the bishop pair. Bishops have colors for a very solid position. Admittedly, this is not much, but it's the kind of thing that, a player who likes to play with a space advantage is patient, good technique, can be very strong with. In the first game, the pawn got up to h5, which created a potential battery on the b1, h7 diagonal, so Dominguez decided to stop it here. And this is the key moment with c5. Black had to play something like queen c7 and wait. But the tactics here don't work out well for black. After rook takes b7, he's losing a piece. Now, I'm going to figure that Dominguez saw all that, but he figured that he was getting enough play here with knight d3. And it looks good, because if f takes e3, knight e1 check, and that forces a draw by perpetual, or he gets the bishop. White has one way, knight c3. Now, important point is that if knight e1, king f1, now the rook is attacked by the knight, not just the bishop. So you don't have knight takes f3. You could try rook c1, but king e2, and it's similar to the game. White is on his way to slithering out. So Dominguez tried rook d2, and Grishuk another accurate move, bishop e2, king f1, and basically consolidated the position and was eventually able to win with the extra piece. So that sacrifice by black, Dominguez thought that maybe he was forcing a draw, but not quite. And unfortunately, that game 4 was the decisive game for the match, and Grishuk moved on to round 4, and Dominguez goes home. Really had a terrific fighting tournament where he faced down elimination a few times, and can be very proud of how he played. But unfortunately, he's done. Now let's get back to the Jeffrey Zhang story. As we mentioned, he lost the first game. All right, but he's able to strike back in the second game. And the match followed the pattern of many others in the last couple of rounds, in that white seems to be winning almost every game. And a lot of players have had situations where a draw with black and they're through. And by the way, I've been there myself. I know that it's not easy to do, and they weren't able to do it. So Jeffrey was able to square the match in second game, send it into overtime, and then he was able to take the lead in the match by winning a drawish-looking rook and pawn ending, and we're going to see next the critical portion of that game. Okay, we're going to pick up the action after 43 moves. Jeffrey playing white, and his main advantage is that he's got the he's just a little bit quicker advancing his passed rook pawn. His king is a little bit better placed now. He plays the move rook a1. All right, setting up very typical ideas of pushing the pawn to a7. Now, okay, black does not have time to put the rook behind the pawn and put the king on g7 or h7, which is a typical defense. So therefore, he tried to bring the king over. But this is, in a way, is kind of a rookie mistake. When you watch amateurs play rook and pawn endings, the mistake they typically make is they don't realize how well a rook behind the passed pawn takes care of it. And very often the drawing technique is to just keep the king safe on the other side. When you bring the king over, you often abandon other pawns in your position. The thing to do for Duda was to play king e6. And if a6, king f5. So if a7, he goes behind. He hides his king. Now, if rook d8, rook e1 check, this is a useful move. Wherever the king goes, rook to a1. Rook takes d5 check, king f4. So white grabs a pawn, but you see the beautiful activity of the black pieces, and because of that, he's in no danger at all. So king e6 was just an absolute instant ending of the game, ending of white's chances to win. But after king d7, different story, a6, and now rook a1 is the best move. King c7 is another inaccuracy, and after rook f8, white is now simply winning, as he's going to take off the f6 pawn. And he may not queen the a pawn, but now he's got a free run with his king. Duda tries to distract with the h pawn, but it's not enough. And here you see a typical motif in the ending is that you're able to hide to take the pawn and hide the king. So black does not have a check to win the rook. And white is okay with trading pawns. Rook b2, rook a2. I mean, he doesn't need the a pawn, but it doesn't hurt to have it. Putting the rook behind it is essentially the same as cutting off the king, because the king can't run away from it. And rook f8, he resigned anyway. White would probably play king e6, maybe king c6. The bottom line is that the pawn comes forward, and white will have some form of a Lucena position to win the game clearly. So suddenly, Jeffrey Zhang went from facing elimination to facing victory in the match. But J.K. Duda showed that he was made from some tough stuff too. And in the fourth game, he came out with an interesting psychological ploy. He opened with a3. He opened with a3 to, throw Jeffrey off his game. It's these are quick games, so just to maybe get a little bit of a time edge, or get him into something not so well thought out. Certainly not to get any kind of advantage in the position, but just to avoid some theory, to make him play. And it ended up being successful. Duda was able to win the game, and then horror of horrors, Duda took the lead in the fifth game. And fifth game, now we are down to 10-minute games. And this one, Jeffrey was basically got to a position where he had really a forced win, but started to lose the thread. So we're going to look at the critical moment in that game, which almost spelled elimination for Jeffrey Zhang. Okay, so this was we pick up the action, move 28, a very spirited Caro-Kann, advanced Caro-Kann, and Jeffrey is on move playing black, and here he has a great opportunity. Knight to g3 check, and okay, if white plays a pawn takes, knight h3 box, then he can take that. Even queen takes h2 is fine here, but probably even stronger is g2, and then queen takes f3, continuing the attack. And of course, black is winning here. I don't think that was a stumbling block. Knight g3, I think more likely, Jeffrey was not so sure about bishop takes g3, pawn takes h3, as against most moves, white is okay, but not against rook f7. Rook f7 is a crushing move, and after that, the white position falls apart. There is no defense. So that's what he had. He just had to find that. But not seeing that in a quick game, he, kind of played indecisively, just defending the pawn on e6, and then gradually, white is able to take over. And this attacking lunge proves to be misguided. If he recaptures the bishop, then white is able to take the knight. So knight f4, but now white shows that he's attacking too. And defending, rook f1, unfortunately. Perhaps, probably missed by Jeffrey. But white just has enough resources. The bishop guards g1, very annoyingly. And, well, that's the end of it. Black has no answer. So, horrible loss. I mean, Jeffrey had to feel that he was on the verge of winning that game. And there's so many downs in these matches, but, players can sometimes find so much inner strength, and that's what Jeffrey did again, and he was able to win the next game and keep it going, take it down to the blitz chess, and finally he was able to win the match in game 8, and we're going to have a look at the decisive moment of that game. Okay, remember Duda is kind of a blitz specialist, and he's played, with the elite players. I talked about him before, that he does like to throw out weird openings to confuse. So he plays Alekhine, which is not that offbeat, but Jeffrey throws out a 4 pawns. More power to him. You don't see the 4 pawns that much. Partly, I think black is okay in the main lines, and also partly, I think that in the classical variation, it's just believed that white just has a slight but solid edge. It's just today's chess. But Duda plays a slightly unusual move order in holding back the knight, but I think that they kind of transpose it to something sort of normal. So it actually looks a lot like an exchange variation position, except with the f pawns off the board. And so he starts to get some edge here. Now it sharpens up. Duda decides to go for a confusionary riff with bishop takes d1. And Jeffrey responds with rook g6. So if he takes the bishop takes h6 is too strong. Can't prevent rook g7. That black is going to cost black his queen. And if bishop c2, I think white will just simply play rook takes h6. Just snap off that pawn in front of the king. So Duda plays the best move, knight takes d4. And knight e2. All right, so finally he gets his pawn, but he has weakened his back rank. However, Duda does not take advantage of it the right way. He needs to play queen c5 check. Now, if bishop e3, rook d1, king f2, queen f8, Similar to the game, except the bishop has been forced to retreat. So black is okay here. One other possibility to queen c5 is queen e3, but then black can just trade queens, play something like king f7, and maybe white is a touch better because of pawn structure, but black is very much in the game. Instead, rook d1, mistake, king f2, queen f8. Very natural for blitz, but the problem is knight f3 just stops everything, and black has no time for anything like bishop takes f3 because rook g7 is coming. So he ended up just losing the bishop. And then, okay, because of the circumstances, he kept playing. And Jeffrey does not show any mercy. Finishes up very sensibly, getting rid of the queen. No chance to go wrong with the queen off the board. And so Duda resigns. And Jeffrey Zhang had won a marathon fourth round match in 8 games. Well done. All right. Now, I'm sorry to give short shrift to the matches of the non-Americans, which weren't too shabby. Here are the results. Yu Yangyi eliminated Nepomniachtchi, and Vasyl Lagrave defeated Svidler. Those matches were both over in 2 games. Ding sent home Kirill Alexenko, who had been one of the sensations of the tournament and done extremely well to get to the 4th round. But he met his match in the rapid games. Ding won both of them to take that one 3-1. The other 2 matches were decided in the 10-minute games, with Aronian besting Li Kuan-lim and Rajabov winning the Azerbaijani Derby over Mamedyarov. So down to 8 players now in the World Cup. The Skolkovo Women's Grand Prix ended in victory for Humpy Koneru as she rode a second-half surge to post a terrific comeback result. Some of you may not even know who that is because she's kind of gone away from chess, but she was one of the strongest players in the world when she was active, and she's kind of come back to reclaim. So I hope I can eventually show something from that event. The World Cup has just been so enthralling. It's just been kind of pushing everything out. Likewise, the St. Louis Fall Classic. I think they've had like 2 or 3 months straight of tournaments in St. Louis. Got to hand it to those guys. Just what they're doing out there. But of course, it's interesting timing because nobody is paying attention to anything but the World Cup right now because that's the big thing. But while the World Cup going on, Ray Robson posted a "Don't forget about me" kind of result, scoring 7-2 and winning the A group by a 2-point margin. All right, again, congratulations to Jeffrey Zhang on making it to the Elite 8 in the World Cup. I hope everyone enjoyed the show. It was a bit of a slog for me today. I've got a head cold. I hope that didn't make me less comprehensible, but still had fun recounting the wonderful games from this World Cup tournament. And I hope everyone will also join me next time on GM Joel's Chess Week Recap on ICC.